If you grew up watching the third chapter of the Jurassic saga, you remember the exact moment the hierarchy shifted. We all watched that massive sail break through the tree line, and we all believed we were looking at a creature in its absolute prime. For over 2 decades, the fandom has universally accepted the InGen Spinosaurus as the ultimate apex predator, a fully realized monster that rightfully dethroned the Tyrannosaurus Rex. It is a shared memory that feels entirely unquestionable. But there is a glaring chronological blind spot hidden within the history of Isla Sorna, a biological and mathematical impossibility that most of us have completely ignored. When you align InGen's classified timeline with the actual physical data of this predator, a deeply unsettling truth emerges. The undisputed king that survived a plane crash and tore through the jungle wasn't at the ceiling of its power at all. The terrifying reality is that you were actually watching a teenager. And that sounds absurd at first, because the film gives you every reason to believe the opposite. Nothing about the way Jurassic Park 3 presents this animal suggests immaturity. It is introduced with the visual weight of a final boss. It towers over the men around it, destroys the plane with terrifying force, and kills the only tyrannosaur in the film in seconds. So, if you've always read the Spinosaurus as a fully grown adult, that does not make you careless. It means the movie did its job. It wanted you to see certainty. It wanted you to see dominance. And because of that, most fans never think to question the one thing the film never actually confirms. That is where the discomfort begins. Because once you step outside the movie itself, the picture becomes much less stable. The official measurements are already strange. The timeline around Site B is even stranger. And the deeper you go into the surrounding lore, the harder it becomes to defend the idea that this animal had already reached the end of its growth. Even longtime fans miss this because they focus on the spectacle, the broken neck, the roar, the plane crash, the chase. But those scenes distract from the one detail that matters most, when this creature could have existed in the first place. And once that date enters the conversation, the entire argument shifts away from opinion and into something much harder to escape: basic chronology. According to the Masrani global backdoor files released during the Fallen Kingdom era, InGen's illegal activity on Isla Sorna did not end cleanly after the events of the first films. Site B was used again, secretly. And among the animals associated with that late phase of cloning were species like Spinosaurus, Ceratosaurus, Corythosaurus, and Ankylosaurus, animals tied to what fans now refer to as the amalgam testing period. That matters because those files place this wave of experimentation in the late 1990s, most likely 1999. Jurassic Park 3 takes place in July of 2001. So even if we give the broadest possible margin, the Spinosaurus on screen had only been alive for around 2 years, 2.5 at most. That is not a small detail. That is the entire case. Now, the obvious response is that InGen animals grow fast. And they do. The franchise has established accelerated development again and again. But that is exactly where the misunderstanding begins. Rapid growth is not the same thing as completed growth. An animal can reach a terrifying size in a short period of time and still be well short of its adult frame, adult mass, and adult behavioral maturity. That is the contradiction at the center of this entire debate. The thing the fandom treats as proof of adulthood, its size, is actually the easiest thing to fake in a genetically modified animal. And once you accept that, one question becomes inevitable. If, in 2001, we had a massive Spinosaurus that was only 2 years old, just how large did InGen actually expect that animal to become? This massive predator was born in 1999, so regardless of its size, was it actually an adult? One of the most overlooked pieces of supplementary material in the entire franchise gives us a direct answer. In the interactive release Jurassic Park Explorer, the Spinosaurus isn't described as an animal measuring just over 13 meters that had already reached its limit. It's presented as something far more massive, a colossal carnivore with a projected adult length of around 18 meters and a weight of 16 to 20 metric tons. That changes everything, because even if we use the most generous estimates, placing the Jurassic Park 3 animal at roughly 15.3 meters long, 5.5 meters tall at the head, 6.5 meters at the top of the sail, and weighing 10 metric tons. Other materials indicate that in 2001, it was actually around 13.4 meters long, 4.88 meters tall at the top of the head, 6 meters to the top of the dorsal sail, and weighed approximately 8 metric tons. But even then, the conclusion isn't suddenly that this was an adult. Quite the opposite. A 15-meter Spinosaurus only strengthens the argument. It means this animal was growing at an extraordinary rate, not that it had finished growing. And this is where the conventional interpretation of the film begins to fall apart. For years, fans have treated the size of the JP3 Spinosaurus as the final word in the debate, but the expanded official material turns that very size into evidence against it being fully grown, rather than evidence that it was. If the expected adult size approached 18 meters in length, 6 meters tall at the head, and 7 meters tall at the top of the sail, with a weight of 16 to 20 metric tons, then the animal that roamed Isla Sorna was still developing. And once you look at the situation from that perspective, the film itself begins to look very different. Because once that timeline locks into place, the Spinosaurus stops reading like a finished apex predator and starts reading like something far more unstable. As a fan, that changes the emotional texture of Jurassic Park 3. It does not make the animal less intimidating, it makes it more disturbing. You are no longer watching a mature super predator executing clean, efficient behavior. You are watching a massive subadult with accelerated growth, flooded with aggression, operating inside a body it may not have fully learned to control. Look at the way it engages with the humans. A surface-level reading sees relentless hostility, but a closer reading sees excess. It overcommits, it lashes out, it smashes, shoves, and batters its environment instead of conserving movement the way a fully seasoned territorial animal often would. Even the airplane attack feels less like a calculated kill and more like an explosive dominance response from a creature reacting on instinct and force. That distinction matters. Casual viewers remember the Spinosaurus as the monster that replaced the Rex. Fans who dig one layer deeper start to see something else. Not just power, but volatility. Not just control, but immaturity. The entire set of encounters begins to feel different when you realize the animal may have still been in the middle of its physical and behavioral development. And that is why this detail is so easy to miss. The movie shows you size, noise, and destruction, so your brain fills in the rest. It assumes age. It assumes completion. But once the chronology is in view, those same scenes stop feeling like proof of adulthood. They start feeling like warning signs. In other words, the real horror of the JP3 Spinosaurus is not that InGen built a monster this dangerous, it is that they may have unleashed it before it was even finished. And that leads directly into a second belief the fandom rarely stops to question at all. Even though I'm saying this, I made a previous video where I stated that the Spinosaurus was chasing the people because it had lost one of its offspring. That argument is strong. We hear gunshots, and Cooper has an injury that was caused by something much smaller than the Spinosaurus. It could only have been a baby. That detail is very compelling. Or it could be both. Animals can become capable of reproducing at a very young age in some cases. Which one do you think is more likely? For years, one label has done a lot of heavy lifting in this conversation: amalgam. The moment fans hear that word tied to late InGen experimentation on Isla Sorna, the assumption becomes almost automatic. If the Spinosaurus came out of that era, then it must have been a hybrid, a prototype, a genetic chimera, essentially a rough draft of the Indominus Rex. But that assumption is far less secure than people think. Here is the contradiction. The material most often used to support the hybrid Spino idea almost never describes the animal the way the franchise describes its true hybrids. When Jurassic World wants you to know a creature is a composite, it says so clearly. The Indominus Rex is framed as engineered. The Indoraptor is framed as manufactured. Their identities are inseparable from the fact that they are made, not simply bred. The InGen Spinosaurus is different. In the Jurassic Park Explorer material, the animal is described in the language of natural history, not synthetic design. Its sail is discussed as a biological structure tied to temperature regulation. Its scale is emphasized as that of a colossal carnivore. Its presence is framed like a resurrected titan, not a laboratory accident. Even when expanded lore lore circles around the illegal cloning period on Sorna, the Spinosaurus is still usually presented as a species-level animal, not as a named genetic composite with publicly defined donor components. That does not prove every fan theory wrong, but it does force a more careful conclusion. Created during the amalgam testing era is not the same as confirmed hybrid. Those are two very different claims, and the franchise itself has never treated the JP3 Spinosaurus with the same explicit hybrid language used for later monsters. And that matters because it changes what this creature represents. If it was not a one-off engineered mistake, then it may have been something even more unsettling, a deliberate attempt to produce a pure, fictionalized Spinosaurus at enormous scale. Not an experiment that went wrong, but a prehistoric predator designed to function exactly as intended inside Jurassic Park's version of biology. That controversy has followed the character ever since Camp Cretaceous brought the Spinosaurus back into the franchise. A lot of fans rejected the connection immediately. The coloration looked different. The roar felt less metallic, less violent, less overpowering than it did in 2001. And on the surface, those objections sound reasonable, but they become much weaker once you stop imagining the JP3 animal as a completed adult. If the Isla Sorna specimen was only an early subadult in 2001, then by the time of Camp Cretaceous in 2015, that same animal would be around 16 years old. In other words, no longer a rapidly growing juvenile-sized predator, but a fully matured giant. And that lines up much more cleanly with the broader tie-in claims that place an adult InGen Spinosaurus closer to 17 or even 18 meters in length. One piece of evidence for this is that during the Jurassic World era, sources indicate that the JP3 Spinosaurus is now 17.5 meters long, 6 meters tall at the head, 7 meters tall at the sail, and weighs 15 metric tons. There is also a visual detail that is very hard to dismiss. The white marking across the snout and face tracks surprisingly well between the two designs. It is not just that both animals are Spinosauruses, it is that the patterning appears to guide one design into the other. For a franchise that regularly uses scars, markings, and silhouette cues to identify returning individuals, that is not a trivial overlap. Then there is the environment. The JP3 Spinosaurus was introduced on Isla Sorna, a wet, river-fed ecosystem that fits the semi-aquatic image fans associate with the species. On Manticorp Island, that same animal is operating in a much harsher and more artificial landscape, including dry terrain, that would be far less natural for a giant water-adapted predator. A heavier, older animal living in a less suitable environment would not necessarily sound the same, move the same, or even present the same intensity it had as a younger subadult in its physical prime of aggression. So yes, the differences are real, but they do not disprove continuity. In fact, they may be exactly what continuity should look like. And if that is true, then the final picture becomes much larger than a simple size debate. The legacy of the InGen Spinosaurus changes the moment you stop asking whether it looked big and start asking whether it was finished. That is the real shift here. The creature that broke the Tyrannosaur's neck in Jurassic Park 3 was not necessarily the final form of InGen's most extreme carnivore. It was more likely an early subadult, already massive, already lethal, but still short of the 18-meter, 16 to 20-ton scale suggested by the franchise's own extended material. Whether you place it at 13.3 meters or push it to 15 in 2001, the conclusion stays the same. Fast growth does not equal full maturity, and that makes the film more unsettling, not less. What chased Grant through the jungle was not the ceiling of InGen's ambition. It was a glimpse of what that ambition was still becoming. If you want more deep-dive Jurassic analysis like this, subscribe to Primalis. And if you had to choose, do you think the Camp Cretaceous Spinosaurus is the same animal from Isla Sorna or a different specimen built from the same blueprint? Let me know in the comments.